Sarah Johnson stood in front of her bedroom mirror, carefully adjusting her dark curly hair and smoothing down her new blue sweater. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her backpack, heavy with new textbooks. It was her first day at Riverside High School, and even though she was used to being the new student, something felt different this time. Through her window, she could see her father, Dr. Marcus Johnson, already dressed in his sharp gray suit, drinking his morning coffee in their kitchen. He had recently been appointed as the new principal of Riverside High, but they had both agreed to keep this information quiet. Sarah understood why. Her father wanted to see how the school really worked before making any changes. "Ready for your first day?" Dr. Johnson asked as Sarah came down for breakfast. His warm smile helped calm her nerves a little. He was always like that, radiating quiet strength and wisdom. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, grabbing a piece of toast. "Are you sure about not telling anyone you're my dad?" Dr. Johnson nodded, his expression serious. "Sometimes the best way to fix things is to first understand how they really work. We need to see Riverside High as it truly is, not how people might pretend it to be around the principal's daughter." Sarah understood what he meant. At their last school, things had been different. Teachers had treated her specially once they knew who her father was, and some students had kept their distance. This time, she wanted to make real friends and be judged for who she really was. The drive to school was quiet, with Sarah watching the unfamiliar neighborhoods pass by. They had moved to this new city just 2 weeks ago, and everything still felt strange. Her father dropped her off 2 blocks from school, another part of their plan to keep things normal. Walking through the main entrance of Riverside High, Sarah felt the familiar butterfly feeling in her stomach that came with being new. The hallways were bustling with students reuniting after summer break, their loud chatter and laughter echoing off the lockers. She clutched her schedule tightly, looking for room 204, AP Chemistry with Ms. Reynolds. Several students smiled at her as she passed, and one girl even waved, which made Sarah feel a bit better. She had always been good at making friends, and her natural smile and kind personality usually helped her fit in quickly. But she was also proud of her intelligence and had worked hard to get into advanced classes. Finding room 204, Sarah took a deep breath before walking in. The chemistry lab was large and well-equipped, with neat rows of black-topped lab tables. Most of the seats were already filled with students chatting and comparing summer stories. Sarah noticed she was one of only 3 black students in the class. Ms. Reynolds, a tall woman with graying blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, was writing on the whiteboard. She turned as Sarah entered, and for a brief moment, something flickered across her face, something that made Sarah's stomach tighten slightly. "You must be Sarah Johnson," Ms. Reynolds said, her voice crisp and cool. "You're transferred from?" She left the question hanging in the air. "Carter High School, ma'am," Sarah replied politely. "I was in their advanced placement program." Ms. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, looking down at her papers. "Indeed. Well, you should know that our AP Chemistry program is quite rigorous. I hope you'll be able to keep up with our standards here." There was something in the way she said it that made Sarah's shoulders tense, but she kept her smile in place. "I'm looking forward to the challenge, Ms. Reynolds." "Take a seat next to Ms. Chen," Ms. Reynolds said, pointing to an empty chair beside an Asian girl who gave Sarah a friendly wave. As Sarah made her way to her seat, she could feel Ms. Reynolds' eyes following her. The girl next to her, Emma Chen, immediately leaned over with a warm smile. "Don't mind Ms. Reynolds," Emma whispered. "She's like that with everyone at first. I'm Emma, by the way." Sarah smiled back, grateful for the friendly face. As she took out her new textbook and notebook, she thought about her father, probably settling into his office right now, beginning his quiet observation of the school. She was determined to make him proud and show everyone that she deserved to be in this advanced class. What Sarah didn't know yet was that this classroom would soon become the center of a storm that would change Riverside High forever. For now, though, she was just another new student, ready to prove herself in a new school, carrying a secret that would eventually turn everything upside down. 2 weeks into the school year, Sarah sat in her usual spot next to Emma in AP Chemistry, her hand raised high in the air. She knew the answer to Ms. Reynolds' question about molecular structures, but once again, the teacher's eye seemed to look right through her as if she were invisible. "Anyone?" Ms. Reynolds asked, her gaze sweeping past Sarah to land on Jason Miller, a blonde-haired boy who hadn't even raised his hand. Mr. Miller, Perhaps you'd like to answer. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at Sarah's still raised hand. Actually, I think Sarah knows the answer. She's been raising her hand for a while. Ms. Reynolds' lips tightened into a thin line. I'm asking you, Mr. Miller, not Ms. Johnson. Sarah slowly lowered her hand, feeling her cheeks burn. Under the table, Emma squeezed her arm in silent support. This wasn't the first time Ms. Reynolds had ignored her in class, and both girls knew it wouldn't be the last. Later that day, as Sarah got her graded quiz back, she stared at the red B, marked at the top of her paper. Something didn't feel right. She had checked her answers twice before turning it in, and she was sure they were correct. Looking over at Emma's quiz, which had almost identical answers, Sarah noticed her friend had received an A. May I ask about question 4? Sarah approached Ms. Reynolds' desk after class, holding her quiz. I think my answer matches the textbook's explanation. Ms. Reynolds barely looked up from her computer. Ms. Johnson, perhaps in your previous school, the standards were different. Here at Riverside High, we expect precise answers that show true understanding, not just memorized responses. Sarah felt her throat tighten. But my answer was exactly like Emma's, and she got full points. Are you suggesting I grade unfairly? Ms. Reynolds finally looked up, her eyes cold. Maybe instead of questioning my grading methods, you should focus on improving your work. Advanced placement classes aren't suitable for everyone, you know. In the hallway, Emma waited for Sarah, her face concerned. That's not right, Sarah. Your answers were perfect, even better explained than mine. Sarah shrugged, trying to hide how much the interaction had hurt. Maybe she's just really strict, she said, but both girls knew that wasn't the real reason. During the next few classes, Ms. Reynolds' behavior became more obvious. When Sarah correctly answered a difficult question about chemical reactions, the teacher immediately asked her to explain in detail how she knew the answer, something she never did with other students. When Sarah helped her lab partner fix a mistake during an experiment, Ms. Reynolds accused her of disrupting the class. One afternoon, as students were setting up for a lab experiment, Ms. Reynolds made an announcement that made Sarah's stomach turn. Class, I want to remind everyone about maintaining our previous academic standards, she said, her eyes fixing deliberately on Sarah. We can't lower our expectations just to make certain students feel more comfortable. Several students shifted uneasily in their seats. Mark Rodriguez, sitting behind Sarah, muttered, "That's messed up," under his breath. Even Jason Miller, usually quiet and uninvolved, frowned at the teacher's words. Emma started documenting everything in a small notebook she kept in her backpack. Just in case, she told Sarah during lunch. This isn't right, and someone should know what's happening. Sarah wanted to tell someone, wanted to run to her father's office and explain everything, but she remembered their agreement and her father's words about seeing the school as it really was. Still, every day became harder. She started double-checking all her work 3 times, stayed up late studying extra materials, and raised her hand only when she was absolutely certain of the answer. Nothing seemed to make a difference. Other teachers noticed Sarah's intelligence and participation in their classes. Her English teacher, Mrs. Thompson, often praised her insightful essays, and her math teacher, Mr. Garcia, had already suggested she consider joining the Math Olympics team. But in chemistry, it felt like she was fighting an invisible battle. Just drop it, a classmate advised her one day after Ms. Reynolds had made another pointed comment about natural aptitude while handing back their lab reports. Everyone knows how she is. But Sarah couldn't just drop it. Her father had always taught her that education was too important to give up on, and she loved chemistry too much to let anyone drive her away. Still, as she sat in class each day, watching Ms. Reynolds praise students who gave answers less complete than her own, she felt a weight growing heavier in her chest. What Sarah didn't realize was that the subtle signs of discrimination she was experiencing were building toward something bigger, something that would soon force everyone at Riverside High to confront an uncomfortable truth about one of their most experienced teachers. 1 month into the semester, the tension in Ms. Reynolds' AP chemistry class had become impossible to ignore. What started as subtle discrimination had grown into something much more obvious, and Sarah wasn't the only one who noticed it. That Wednesday morning, Sarah arrived early to class to find someone had written, "You've got this," on a sticky note and left it on her desk. She smiled, recognizing Emma's handwriting, but her smile faded when Ms. Reynolds walked in and immediately crumpled up the note. "We don't need to clutter our learning space with unnecessary items," Ms. Reynolds said loudly, dropping the crumpled paper into the trash. Her eyes met Sarah's with a cold challenge, daring her to protest. During the lesson about chemical reactions, Sarah noticed several students holding their phones under their desks, recording Ms. Reynolds' behavior. The teacher was being particularly harsh today, making pointed remarks that made Sarah's hands shake as she took notes. "Some people," Ms. Reynolds announced while reviewing homework, "might find this level of chemistry too challenging for their natural abilities. There's no shame in taking regular chemistry instead." Mark Rodriguez, who sat behind Sarah, wasn't subtle about recording this time. He held his phone up openly, and when Ms. Reynolds noticed, her face turned red with anger. "Put that phone away immediately," she snapped. "Sorry, Ms. Reynolds," Mark said, not sounding sorry at all. "I'm just documenting this for my personal study notes." Several students tried to hide their smiles. They all knew what Mark was really doing. Even some of the students who usually stayed quiet were beginning to show their support for Sarah in small ways. Later that day, during lab work, things got worse. Sarah was carefully measuring chemicals for an experiment when Ms. Reynolds suddenly appeared behind her. "Miss Johnson," she said sharply, making Sarah jump. "Your measurements are all wrong. Did you even read the instructions?" Sarah looked down at her precisely measured chemicals. "Yes, ma'am. The instructions say 25 milliliters of the solution, which is exactly what I have here." Ms. Reynolds picked up Sarah's beaker and held it up to the light. "This looks like far too much. Are you trying to sabotage the experiment?" Emma, who had been watching nearby, stepped forward. "Ms. Reynolds, I just measured my chemicals the same way. Sarah's measurements are correct." The teacher's face darkened. "Ms. Chen, I don't recall asking for your opinion. 5 points off both your lab grades for disrupting class." Jason Miller, who rarely spoke up, suddenly joined in. "That's not fair. They didn't do anything wrong." "Would you like to lose points too, Mr. Miller?" Ms. Reynolds threatened. The whole class had stopped working to watch. Some students were openly recording now, their phones pointed at the scene. Ms. Reynolds noticed and her anger seemed to grow. "Everyone who has their phone out will receive detention," she declared. "This is a chemistry class, not a film studio." But the students didn't put their phones away. Instead, more of them took out their phones, silently recording. They had seen enough of Ms. Reynolds' unfair treatment. After class, a group of students gathered around Sarah in the hallway. "We've been collecting evidence," Maria Garcia told her, showing Sarah a folder on her phone labeled Reynolds Documentation. "We have videos from almost every class this month." "You're not the only one she's been mean to," added David Kim, another student. "She made comments about my accent last semester, but I was too scared to say anything. Not anymore." Sarah felt overwhelmed by their support, but also scared about what might happen next. "Thank you, guys, but I don't want anyone getting in trouble because of me." "We're not getting in trouble because of you," Emma said firmly. "We're standing up because what she's doing is wrong." As they talked, they didn't notice Ms. Reynolds watching them from her classroom door, her face growing darker with each passing moment. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "Administration?" "Yes, this is Patricia Reynolds. I need to report a group of students for disruptive behavior and unauthorized filming in my classroom." "Yes, I'll give you their names, starting with Sarah Johnson." What Ms. Reynolds didn't realize was that her attempt to get Sarah in trouble would backfire spectacularly. The evidence collected by the students would soon become crucial in exposing years of discriminatory behavior that the school could no longer ignore. The day of the important mid-semester lab experiment arrived, and the air in the chemistry classroom felt thick with tension. Sarah had studied for hours the night before, reviewing every detail of the complex procedure they would need to follow. Her father had noticed her stress at breakfast, but, staying true to their agreement, didn't ask about it. "Today's experiment will count for 20% of your semester grade," Ms. Reynolds announced, walking between the lab tables. "You have exactly 45 minutes to complete it correctly." Her eyes lingered on Sarah. "No mistakes will be tolerated." Sarah took a deep breath and began working. Her hands moved steadily as she mixed chemicals in the exact order specified in the instructions. Emma worked beside her, but they couldn't talk. Ms. Reynolds had separated all the students and forbidden any communication during the experiment. 20 minutes into the lab, Sarah's solution began turning the perfect shade of blue-green, exactly as described in their textbook. She double-checked her measurements and notes, confirming she had followed every step perfectly. A small smile appeared on her face as she recorded her results. Ms. Reynolds noticed Sarah's progress and quickly walked over to her station. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she approached, drawing everyone's attention. "Stop what you're doing, Ms. Johnson," she commanded loudly. The entire class looked up from their work. Sarah froze, her hand still holding her pencil above her lab notebook. "Is something wrong, Ms. Reynolds? Would you care to explain how you've completed the experiment so quickly?" Ms. Reynolds' voice was cold and accusing. "This is an advanced procedure that should take at least 35 minutes. I just followed the instructions carefully," Sarah explained, her voice trembling slightly. "I prepared last night by studying the procedure." "Impossible," Ms. Reynolds cut her off. "There's no way you could have achieved these results so quickly without cheating." She picked up Sarah's lab notebook. "Who gave you the answers? Or did you somehow obtain my answer key?" Sarah felt her face grow hot as her classmates stared. "I didn't cheat. I can explain every step I took." "Save your excuses," Ms. Reynolds snapped. "In all my 20 years of teaching, I've never seen a student miraculously complete this experiment so quickly. Especially Nada." She paused, but her meaning was clear to everyone. Emma stood up from her station. "Ms. Reynolds, I saw Sarah working. She didn't cheat. She's just really good at." "Sit down, Ms. Chen," Ms. Reynolds shouted. "Unless you want to be accused of helping her cheat." Other students began to protest now. "This isn't right," Mark called out. "Sarah's the best student in class." "Everyone be quiet." Ms. Reynolds' face had turned red. "Ms. Johnson, gather your things and go to the administration office. I'm reporting this academic dishonesty." Sarah's hands shook as she tried to pack her bag. Tears burned in her eyes, but she fought to hold them back. She wouldn't give Ms. Reynolds the satisfaction of seeing her cry. As she walked to the door, Ms. Reynolds called out one final blow. "It's students like you who are lowering the standards of this school. I'll make sure the administration knows exactly what kind of student you really are." The moment Sarah stepped into the hallway, her composure crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she walked quickly past other classrooms, trying to muffle her sobs. She hadn't cried once during all the previous unfair treatment, but this public humiliation was too much. Instead of going to the administration office, Sarah found herself walking toward the girls' bathroom. Inside, she locked herself in a stall and finally let herself break down completely. Her whole body shook with sobs as she thought about how hard she had worked, only to be accused of cheating in front of everyone. Back in the classroom, Emma had taken out her phone, recording everything that happened after Sarah left. Ms. Reynolds was still ranting about maintaining standards, and certain students trying to game the system. What neither Sarah nor Ms. Reynolds knew was that at that exact moment, Dr. Johnson was walking down the hallway, doing his usual quiet rounds of the school. He paused when he heard crying coming from the girls' bathroom, not yet realizing it was his daughter. And he certainly didn't know that this moment would force him to finally break his silence and confront the racism that had been poisoning his school. The news of what happened in AP Chemistry spread through Riverside High like wildfire. By lunchtime, most students had seen the videos of Ms. Reynolds accusing Sarah of cheating. Emma sat alone at her usual lunch table, worried about her friend who hadn't come out of the bathroom yet, when she noticed something unexpected beginning to happen. First, Mark Rodriguez approached with his laptop open. "I've been editing together all the videos I took in class," he said, sitting down. "Look at this compilation. It shows everything Ms. Reynolds has done over the past month." Then Maria Garcia joined them, carrying a thick folder. "I found these old assignments from last semester," she explained, spreading out papers on the table. "Look at how she graded my work differently after she heard me speaking Spanish to my mom at parent night." One by one, more students gathered around their lunch table. David Kim brought screenshots of emails where Ms. Reynolds had made comments about his language barrier, despite him being born in America. Jason Miller had his graded papers from last year, showing how his grades mysteriously improved after his parents made a large donation to the school. This isn't just about today, Emma realized, looking at all the evidence spreading across their lunch table. She's been doing this to lots of students for a long time. The cafeteria door opened, and Sarah finally walked in, her eyes still red from crying. She stopped in surprise when she saw the large group of students gathered around her usual table. Emma quickly waved her over. "Sarah, you need to see this," Emma said gently. "You're not alone. Not anymore." As Sarah sat down, students began sharing their stories one by one. Lucy Chen, a quiet junior, spoke about how Ms. Reynolds had told her she was surprisingly articulate during a presentation. Andrew Thompson, a senior, described how she had accused him of plagiarism last year when he wrote an exceptional lab report. "I ended up dropping her class," Andrew admitted. "I wish I had been brave enough to stand up to her then." While they talked, Melissa Wam, the school newspaper's editor, took careful notes. "This is bigger than one incident," she said. "This is a pattern that needs to be exposed." Emma organized all the evidence they had collected. There were videos from multiple students' phones showing Ms. Reynolds' biased behavior, screenshots of inappropriate comments she had made in email responses, graded papers showing clear differences in how she scored similar work from different students. "Look at these grade comparisons," Emma said, pulling out her notebook where she had been tracking everything. "Sarah and I gave almost identical answers on 5 different assignments, but my grades were always higher." Sarah looked at all the evidence in amazement. "I thought I was just imagining things sometimes," she said softly. "I didn't know she was doing this to so many people." Just then, Katie Martinez from the school's computer club spoke up. "I can help create a secure online folder where we can store all of this evidence. We need to make sure it can't get deleted or lost." The students worked through their lunch period, scanning documents and uploading videos. They organized everything by date and type of incident. What had started as individual experiences was becoming a clear picture of systematic discrimination. "Whatever happens next," Emma declared, "we're all standing together. No one should have to face this alone." Sarah felt tears in her eyes again, but this time they weren't from sadness. Looking around at all these students, different grades, different backgrounds, different experiences, all coming together to stand up against injustice, she felt something powerful replacing her earlier shame and hurt. As the lunch period ended, the students made plans to meet after school to continue organizing their evidence. What they didn't know was that their actions that lunch period would become a crucial turning point in the story. The evidence they gathered would do more than just prove what happened to Sarah. It would expose years of hidden discrimination at Riverside High. "Remember," Emma said as they packed up their materials, "this isn't just about getting one teacher in trouble. This is about making sure our school is fair for everyone." Sarah nodded, feeling stronger with every passing minute. The morning's humiliation still hurt, but now she understood something important. Sometimes it takes one person's pain to bring everyone together and finally create real change. Parent-teacher conference night arrived at Riverside High. The hallways were filled with parents and students moving from classroom to classroom, while teachers sat at their desks ready to discuss student progress. Sarah walked slowly toward the chemistry lab, her father's office door visible at the end of the hallway. Ms. Reynolds sat at her desk, looking pleased with herself as she arranged her gray book and student files. She had specifically requested that Sarah and her parents come at 7:30 p.m., the last slot of the evening. Now it was 7:25, and she smiled smugly, assuming no one would show up. "Good evening, Ms. Reynolds," Sarah said quietly, walking into the classroom alone. The teacher's smile turned cold. "Ms. Johnson, I see your parents couldn't make it. How? Typical." Sarah took a deep breath, remembering all her classmates' support. "Actually, my father is here. He's just finishing up some work." Ms. Reynolds shuffled through her papers, pulling out a thick file. "Well, we have much to discuss about your performance in this class. Starting with that lab incident." "You mean the one where I followed all the instructions correctly?" Sarah's voice was stronger now. "The one where you accused me of cheating in front of everyone." "Watch your tone, young lady," Ms. Reynolds snapped. "This attitude is exactly what I'm talking about. You clearly don't have the proper respect for academic authority." Sarah stood straighter. "Respect goes both ways, Ms. Reynolds. You've been treating me unfairly since the first day of class. Unfairly? Ms. Reynolds let out a sharp laugh. I treat all my students exactly the same. If you can't handle the rigorous standards of AP chemistry, perhaps you should consider a more appropriate level. You mean like how you grade Emma's identical answers higher than mine? Sarah pulled out copies of their assignments from her folder. Or how you ignore my raised hand, but call on others who aren't even volunteering? Ms. Reynolds' face reddened. How dare you make such accusations? This is exactly why I'm recommending your removal from AP Chemistry. Some students simply aren't suited for advanced placement, regardless of whatever. Special considerations got you admitted. Special considerations. Sarah's voice shook slightly, but she kept going. I earned my place here, just like everyone else. The only difference is how you treat me. I've been teaching for 20 years, Ms. Reynolds said coldly. I think I know better than a student what level of chemistry is appropriate for certain demographics. The room fell silent for a moment. Sarah could hear her heart pounding in her ears. Then, a deep voice spoke from the doorway. Please, Ms. Reynolds, continue explaining your views on appropriate levels and demographics. Dr. Marcus Johnson stepped into the classroom, his presence filling the room. Ms. Reynolds' face went from red to pale in seconds. Dr. Johnson, I didn't expect the principal to visit during conferences. Clearly not, he said calmly, walking to stand beside Sarah. But I make it a point to be present when teachers discuss removing my daughter from advanced classes. Ms. Reynolds' mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Your daughter? Yes, my daughter, Dr. Johnson confirmed, placing a supportive hand on Sarah's shoulder. Who is maintained straight A's in every chemistry class she's ever taken, who scored in the 99th percentile on her science placement tests, and who, according to numerous student recordings and testimonies, you have been systematically discriminating against. I had no idea she was Ms. Reynolds stammered. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? Dr. Johnson's voice remained steady, but carried unmistakable authority. You treated her differently because of who you thought she was, not who she actually is, and apparently, she's not the only student you've done this to. Sarah watched as Ms. Reynolds seemed to shrink in her chair. All the teacher's previous confidence had vanished, replaced by growing fear as she realized the full situation. Dr. Johnson, I can explain, she began. Oh, you'll have plenty of opportunity to explain, he interrupted. To me, to the school board, and to everyone else who will be reviewing the extensive evidence of your discriminatory behavior. But for now, this parent-teacher conference is over. As they walked out of the classroom, Sarah finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Her father squeezed her shoulder gently. I'm proud of you, he said softly, for standing up for yourself and for helping others stand up too. Sarah nodded, feeling both drained and relieved. She knew this wasn't the end. There would be meetings, investigations, and probably more confrontations. But for the first time since school began, she felt like justice was finally possible. The next morning, Riverside High was buzzing with excitement. Students whispered in the hallways about what had happened at the parent-teacher conference night. Everyone knew that Ms. Reynolds hadn't shown up for her first period class, and a substitute teacher was handling her classes. In his office, Dr. Johnson sat at his desk, reviewing the thick folder of evidence the students had collected. Emma, Sarah, and 3 other student representatives sat across from him, watching as he carefully went through each document. This is very thorough work, he said, looking up at the students. How long have you been collecting this evidence? Since the beginning of the semester, Emma explained, pointing to her detailed notebook. We have dated entries for everything. Videos, graded assignments, emails, it's all organized by incident. Dr. Johnson nodded seriously. You've done something very important here. This isn't just about one incident or one student anymore. Just then, Mrs. Garcia, the school board president, walked into the office with 2 other board members. Their faces were grave as they took seats around the conference table. Dr. Johnson, Mrs. Garcia said, we've reviewed the initial reports. This is a very serious situation. Indeed it is, Dr. Johnson agreed. He turned to the students. Would you be willing to share your experiences with the board members? One by one, the students began to speak. They talked about the unfair grading, the dismissive comments, and the pattern of discrimination they had witnessed. Sarah spoke last, her voice steady as she described everything that had happened, including the false cheating accusation. "And you have evidence to support all of this?" Mr. Thompson, another board member, asked. Emma opened her laptop and began playing the video clips they had collected. The room fell silent as they watched Ms. Reynolds' behavior captured on camera. Her dismissive tone, her biased comments, and her unfair treatment were all clearly documented. "There's more," Sarah added quietly. "After we started collecting evidence, other former students began reaching out." She handed over a stack of letters. "These are statements from students who graduated in the past 5 years. They'd all experienced similar treatment." Mrs. Garcia read through several letters, her frown deepening. "This goes back much further than we realized. Dr. Johnson, what do you recommend?" "First, Ms. Reynolds needs to be placed on immediate administrative leave while we conduct a full investigation," Dr. Johnson said firmly. "We also need to review all her past grading and student evaluations." The board members nodded in agreement. "We'll need to interview current and former students," Mr. Thompson added. "And there should be a formal hearing." "What about the students currently in her classes?" Emma asked. "Many of them have unfair grades that could affect their college applications." "We'll have all recent grades reviewed by other chemistry teachers," Dr. Johnson assured them. "No student should suffer because of discriminatory grading." As they discussed the next steps, Dr. Johnson's secretary knocked on the door. "Ms. Reynolds is here," she announced. "She's demanding to speak with the board." "Send her in," Mrs. Garcia said. "It's time she answers for her actions." Ms. Reynolds walked in, her usual confidence completely gone. She stopped short when she saw the students and the evidence spread across the table. "Ms. Reynolds," Dr. Johnson said calmly, "the school board is placing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation into discriminatory behavior." "You can't do this," she protested. "I'm a respected teacher with 20 years of experience." "Experience doesn't excuse discrimination," Mrs. Garcia stated firmly. "We have extensive evidence of systematic bias in your teaching methods and grading practices." "These are just students," Ms. Reynolds said dismissively. "They don't understand." "That's exactly the problem," Dr. Johnson interrupted. "You've consistently underestimated and discriminated against students based on their race, ethnicity, and background. That ends today." As Ms. Reynolds was escorted out of the office, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The investigation was just beginning, but already things were changing. "Thank you all for your courage," Dr. Johnson said to the students. "It's not easy to stand up against discrimination, but you've done it in a way that will help protect future students too." As they left the office, Sarah and Emma saw Ms. Reynolds cleaning out her desk, while other teachers watched silently from their doorways. Change was coming to Riverside High, and it had started with students brave enough to speak up and support each other. 3 months after the investigation began, Riverside High looked like a different school. The morning sun shone through the windows of the newly established Student Diversity Council room, where Sarah sat at the head of a large table surrounded by students from all grades and backgrounds. "Our first semester report shows real progress," she announced, sharing copies of a colorful document with everyone. "The anonymous reporting system has helped more students speak up when they experience discrimination." Emma, now the council's vice president, added, "And the peer support program has helped many students feel more comfortable in their advanced classes." The changes at Riverside High had gone far beyond just removing one discriminatory teacher. After Ms. Reynolds was permanently dismissed following the investigation, Dr. Johnson had worked with students and teachers to create lasting changes. "Remember how scared everyone used to be about speaking up?" Mark Rodriguez asked, looking around the room. "Now students know they have a voice." The council meeting was interrupted by a knock at the door. Ms. Martinez, the new AP chemistry teacher, poked her head in with a bright smile. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I wanted to share some news. Our AP chemistry class just got the highest average scores in the district on last week's standardized tests. Sarah and Emma's study group program really made a difference." The students cheered. Under Ms. Martinez's guidance, the chemistry department had become a model of inclusive teaching. She made sure every student had the support they needed to succeed, regardless of their background. Later that day, Sarah walked through the hallways with her father, looking at the new posters the council had created. Each one showed successful students from different backgrounds, with quotes about their experiences at Riverside High. I never thought speaking up about Ms. Reynolds would lead to all this, Sarah said, stopping to straighten one of the posters. Dr. Johnson smiled proudly. Sometimes it takes one brave person to help others find their courage. You didn't just expose one teacher's discrimination, you helped create a whole new culture at this school. They passed by the teacher's lounge, where a mandatory cultural sensitivity training session was taking place. Through the window, Sarah could see teachers engaged in serious discussions, sharing experiences and learning from each other. The best part, Sarah said, is seeing new students feel welcome here. Remember that freshman who was afraid to join AP Biology because of her accent? Maria's sister. Dr. Johnson asked, "How is she doing?" "She got the highest grade on their last test," Sarah beamed. "And she's thinking about starting a science club for ESL students." In the cafeteria, the changes were visible too. Instead of students clustering in separate groups by race or background, the tables were mixed. The student mentoring program had helped break down old barriers, creating new friendships across all grades and cultures. Katie Martinez, still running the online reporting system she had created, approached them with her laptop. "Dr. Johnson, look at these statistics," she said excitedly. "Reports of discrimination have dropped by 78% since last semester, and when incidents do happen, they're addressed immediately." "It's not just about punishing bad behavior anymore," Dr. Johnson explained. "It's about creating an environment where everyone can learn and grow." As they walked toward his office, they passed the school's trophy case. Among the sports trophies and academic awards sat something new, a regional award for excellence in educational equity that Riverside High had received last week. "You know what makes me happiest?" Sarah said, stopping to look at the award. "It's seeing other schools asking us for advice on how to become more inclusive. We're not just changing our school, we're helping change education everywhere." Dr. Johnson put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "And it all started because you were brave enough to stand up for yourself, and others were brave enough to stand with you." The final bell rang, and students poured into the hallways. Sarah watched as a group of freshmen walked past, talking excitedly about their upcoming science fair project. They were from different backgrounds, speaking different languages, but working together naturally. "That's the real change," she thought to herself, "when no one has to be brave just to be treated fairly." As Sarah headed to her last class of the day, she passed by the chemistry lab, Ms. Reynolds' old classroom. Through the window, the sign outside the classroom had been changed. Under AP Chemistry was a new motto: "Everyone has the potential to excel." Sarah smiled, knowing that at Riverside High, those weren't just words anymore, they were reality.